A very warm welcome to all of you and a special one to Raghu and Deepak as well. Thank you for joining us today. Quick background on SaaS Talks, as we always do before we get started. We started this a few years back with the intent that this is meant to be like a roundtable discussion and hopefully not just a monologuous gyan session. Intent is to pick a topic which is a functional topic which is relevant to building a SaaS company, something that you can take back with you and hopefully find a few things out of it to implement on a Monday morning. This is not meant to be a rags to riches story. So we will focus on these topics. The way this works is that between my colleague Shanthan and I, we field the first few questions to set the stage for the particular topic. Thereafter, it is actually totally driven by the questions that all the people in the audience ask. And we do request that two things: keep your questions on this topic and send us suggestions for the other topics, which we can do at a later point in time. And number two is that either raise your hand and we can actually pull you in on the video here, or you can actually put your questions on the Q&A panel. And again, put it on the Q&A panel, not on the chat panel. And we will field these questions with Raghu and Deepak. With that, let me first introduce the topic, and then I'm going to introduce the two guests today. I have probably now been involved with 50 different SaaS companies, and I always find that it is, we always focus on selling. Of course, we are worried about the revenue this quarter, but we always forget that revenue happens only if there is a pipeline. At least in my sales days at SAP, they always used to say that your quarter is as good as the pipeline that you entered it with. The challenge now is how do you build that pipeline, right? And the classical assumption in India has been that we want to build quote unquote me too, low ACV, existing categories, do inbound, Google search, etc. But as these companies are built, we realize that one big demand gen motion is the outbound motion, right? And I have found it very hard to build that motion to make it work. And the intent of today's discussion is to unpeel the layers on the outbound motion, its importance, when to do it, when not to do it, what tech stack to use, lots of different questions, some of which we'll ask, but then I hope that people in the audience are going to ask. With that, let me introduce the two speakers. I'll begin with Raghu here. Of course, we have missed investing in Yellow, which is our bad, but have known now Raghu for many years. He's the founder, CEO of Yellow.ai, which is using AI and automating the customer service function, which we know is a massive market. Raghu incidentally started his career in the EDA and the chip design space, being with a number of companies before he became the founder of Yellow.ai. And I'm assuming, Raghu, that you are now based in the Bay Area as well, right?
That's correct, Alok.
Fantastic, fantastic. And with that, let me come to Deepak. I think I've known Deepak now since 2017, early, I think, when we got connected, actually. Deepak is someone that we had the opportunity to invest in, and we were fortunate. Deepak is now the founder of a company called Adopt.ai, which is still sort of quote unquote stealth, before which he was the founder of Slintel that he successfully sold to Sixth Sense, where he was a VP of product, has spent time in a couple of startups, Eightfold, and prior to that, also with Traction. So Deepak, Raghu, welcome, and thank you so much for joining SaaS Talks today.
Hey, everyone. Great to be here, Alok.
Great. I'm going to begin with the easiest question, which is that, again, both of you have built one or multiple startups or been through other startup journey as well. In my preface to the session today, I did talk about the fact that in general, in India, there is a lot of expertise created in doing the inbound motion. Part of it is driven by the ACVs, part of it is driven by the categories, part of it is driven by the buyer personas. I'm curious that in your experience, when is the right time for a startup to start thinking about the outbound motion for demand gen in the first place? And either of you, please feel free to take. This is meant to be a discussion, so yeah, please feel free to.
Yeah. Sure, Alok. So I'll talk about our journey, and for us, it's the opposite. We started on day one with outbound, and me being the first outbound agent for the company, because this category was not existent. So inbound really works when there is a existing demand where companies are searching for a certain product or service. And Yeah, it started from day one, and that just continued to be the core engine for a really, really long time. After which the partners took off. But even right now, our outbound contribution is significantly higher than inbound, right? Because it is enterprises, and especially in the US, our average ACV is about 200 to 250K. Yeah, so for us, it's from day one. So in fact, now we're seeing how to invigorate inbound rather than invigorate outbound as a broad funnel for the company.
I want to come to Deepak on the same question, but I do have one follow-up question before that, Raghu, which is that your decision to start outbound on day zero, was that driven by the category or was that driven by the kind of customer or the ACV that you were targeting?
I think category for sure, Alok.
Understand. I understand. Deepak, the same question for you, and you have been through this multiple times. So
I was just thinking through when Raghu was speaking, all the startups that I've been in the valley for 10 plus years, every startup that I've seen, although the ACVs were very different, I'll just give you a very quick overview, right? Fraction, low to mid ACV, Eightfold, very high ACV, 200K plus, Slintel, low to mid ACV, and then Six Sense was high ACV. Everyone that I've seen, everybody had outbound from day zero, right? Even Slintel was a category that was a very well-searched category. Look, if you remember, you used to tell your investors, you used to say, hey, Deepak, just focus on inbound.
that's right.
But yeah, to get inbound right, it takes a little bit of time, right? You have to optimize SEO, SEM, even in existing category. I think outbound is the quickest way to get some validation. So I feel like you should do it from day zero, like in any kind of ACV. And then over time, you decide, like once you light up different fires, like what do you want to pivot to? Where do you see the highest bang for the buck?
Deepak, follow-on question to you. I mean, how did you first structure your outbound motion and what worked for you and what did not?
Yeah, so in Slintel, so what we did, like I think everybody knows the initial outbound has to be done by the founder, right? Nobody can sell this product better than a founder. And I would say, like Alok, you mentioned day zero, Raghu mentioned day one. I think you were referring to the same thing. I would say day zero, it's even before you start building product is when I would start outbound, right? Although you're not selling, you don't have a product to sell, I still call it outbound because you have to validate with your target personas what you're building, right? And during the product build, also you kind of continue to validate. And Alok, you were talking about pipe build. The pipe build is already happening during the time you're building the product, right? So when you launch the product, you already had, it takes what, 3 months, 6 months, maybe in the AI space now, 3 months to launch a product. But there's enough pipe build, enough interest, or at least you have iterated product, and then you start like your motion, you start with some initial customers when you launch.
I do want to actually repeat the point again for those people on the session today where you are just starting your journey. I think the point that Deepak made is actually very, very important, which is, and while there is no magic number, but I find that talking to at least 50 people in your outbound motion, even before you're building anything, validating the problem, validating whether your solution is going to drive the value that you anticipate it to drive, what will be the bottlenecks to selling, who will you sell to, etc. And it is actually a process of course, validation, but also a pipeline is being built even before you have built any product. I think it's such an important uh, thing to have laid out. Raghu, one of the things that we always hear, and by the way, which was the reason why at least I was after Deepak's life when we partnered, that look, you need to ramp up the inbound motion, is that at least we found that inbound motion has a higher intent. Outbound motion, you're not able to judge the intent equally well, which means that your sales cycles might be longer, your conversion rates might be lower, and because the conversion rates might be lower, the CACs can be higher as well. And therefore, the entire unit economics actually may not be as strong as sometimes, and the velocity actually also, which you find in the inbound motion. Now, in your case, you said, look, it's the category, right? We don't have a choice whether we do inbound or not, we have to do outbound, right? Is there anything that you would do differently in hindsight?
No, actually, I
As
mean,
you
in
started
fact,
your outbound?
if I were to start a new company, I would actually, one of the first few people I would hire is outbound agents. I don't think I would do that. But at the same time, I think, building inbound, as Deepak rightly said, it takes time. It takes time to build organic inbound. And digital inbound is expensive. But you also can get a lot of customers who are not in your ICP and waste a lot of time and cycles. But I would plan for slowly building out a community and slowly building out your brand. Even before you start building your product, right? You're building outbound, but start a nice podcast or start a nice community of people who are interested in your matter. I think those are the things I would have done quite differently. Maybe I would have started a AI community around customer service. How do you get folks working on customer service as a part of your Slack channel, as a part of a community? How can you keep engaging them? I think that is one thing I would have built differently along with Outbound.
Let me just add to that, Alok. So I think two very important, if I understand your question correctly, you're also trying to see, is there an ACV below which an outbound motion does not make sense, right?
And how do you optimize it more? I mean, I'm also trying to, how is there a way to increase those conversion rates? If you look at the different steps of that process, what do you do to optimize this motion?
Yeah, so that's a secondary question.
Yeah.
But I think firstly, when does outbound make sense, right? Although we are all saying that we should do it from day one or day zero, I think there are two things that are very important. One is what Raghu said: is it an existing category or a new category? If it's a new category, you have no option, right? You have to create awareness. There's no inbound, right? There's no traffic out there. And the second thing I would also ask is, what is the ACV of the deal, right? Is it a very low ACV sale? In which case, like if you think of Apollo.io and a bunch of different products in that category, right? Outbound may not make sense. Like you may have a marketing team, but not a sales team, right?
Yeah.
A slightly higher ACV category, maybe 5K to 15, 20K, you can have an inside sales team, right? Higher than that, you want a mid-market, feet on the street sales team as you go higher and higher ACV. So I think you have to apply that lens too and then to answer your second question, like conversion rates, I think like the way people look at the funnel is you have tofu, bofu, mofu, right? So tofu, mofu, bofu, right? And at every stage, you have to kind of have the right metrics, right? From marketing. So marketing and sales have to work very closely. What is the number of MQLs you need from visitors or from all the campaigns you're doing, and MQLs to SQLs to opportunities to closed one. I think you have to measure that and continuously optimize on that. And there are various ways to optimize, but that's something you should track very closely.
Got it, Deepak. Raghu, a question to you. As you went on your outbound motion in your initial days, how did you actually, how was your ICP refinement happen? How did it happen? If you can walk me through that journey, that would be very helpful for our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, I think initially we did target 2-3 ICPs to figure out what really works in the market for our product. Because initially we started off with a little bit of a broader aperture on whom should we engage at an enterprise. So it was whether the marketing branding department or the customer service department, or is it the CIO? And we had teams go behind all of these 3 different ICPs. And then you keep getting data on which is the ICP that is actually making the decisions, which has a higher conversion rates and stickiness in the use cases. And then you kind of keep refining the ICP that you want to go behind. And then once you refine the ICP of your target buyer, what is probably important in outbound is the actual decision maker in some cases might be the toughest ones or the most expensive ones to get to the table and start chatting, right? Head of CX of, let's say, a Domino's, it's kind of really tough to get to the table on the meeting. But you kind of figure out who are the key influencers for that decision maker. That could be a director or someone in their teams, who are the implementers or execution personnel for these automation projects. So you kind of have those ICPs targeted through these outbound campaigns, and then you kind of reach to the executive as well. But it's more effective if you have a very, very clear definition on what is the use case and who would be the end buyer for your product. But we experimented. I mean, no great. We experimented across different ICPs and looked at all this data. I think most important thing that I would kind of recommend is look at retention data, and because all the other metrics might be good, you might get a lot of marketing or use cases where your product doesn't have great retention, which means that the CAC and the payback might look good, but if the retention is not good, then you're not building a sustainable one. So just one thing that I would kind of reemphasize is look at that as a key metric in defining your ICP as well.
Maybe I'll begin to take the audience questions, which have already begun to pop in. And I again want to make a request that please keep your questions to the outbound demand generation topic for today. If they are not related to this topic, please hold off until a future SaaS talks. I'll take the first question from Sri Vardhan, who is a dear friend and an investor as well. His question is that apart from personalization, how does one differentiate versus competitors in outbound, which is a fair question, right? And how is the outbound approach different for enterprise versus mid-market? Maybe we'll split it into, I think these are two separate questions. So we'll begin with the first question with either of you. How do you differentiate? Of course, you need to personalize, but differentiate vis-a-vis competition. How do you do that?
Yeah, I'll probably start with that first question.
Sure.
I think it depends on how crowded the space. Like if there is one or two major competitors, I wouldn't worry that much. When I say that much, you still have to differentiate in your messaging, right? But if it's a very crowded space, then you have to cut across the noise, which was our case when we were building Slintel, right? And I think the one way you can differentiate is, like Raghu said, there are different personas, maybe at least 2-3 different personas you will sell to. There are different size companies that you sell to. Get as specific as you can. Think about the number one pain point for that persona in that size of the company, in that industry, and talk about how you're solving that better than competitors, right? Supplement that with a case study, with a white paper on that area. Go to events where these people attend, especially if you're doing larger enterprise sale. But I think I would just like, in this world where there's so much spam and there's so much messaging, there's overload of content, I would hinge on be as specific as possible, even if you can just put 1 or 2 liners on a LinkedIn message or an email, really well thought through about that industry, that persona, that pain point, and you get their attention. That should be good enough for you. Start.
For us, from our experience, at least from what I have seen, I think one thing that repeatedly works, and I haven't seen any other thing work as better as this, is talking about similar companies and success stories, customer success stories. I think that has the best response rates and success rates in general, more than any glorified personalized message, etc. For me, I think that made the biggest difference by far.
It's an excellent. Again, I want to repeat that both of you have made this, but I think there is a saying in enterprise software that customers sell customers. In general, when people are buying your software, it goes through an implementation cycle, adoption cycle, etc. At the time people buy, they don't know what they're buying. They're buying trust. And one of the ways in which you sell that trust is to actually talk about other customers. It's not just at the end of the sales cycle where you're doing a reference check. It's right at the beginning itself. So very, very critical thing to differentiate. Shantan, why don't you pick the next question? There are already so many questions now, so we are flooded. So
One interesting question from Bharat. He did mention that, he spoke to 50 users before even building the product. But for very early stage founders, how do you figure out, those 50 people? Uh, how do you incentivize them to speak to you and figure out that these are the 50 people that we want to reach? What works well in getting them on the call in the first place? And
Yeah,
question,
because you have nothing to sell either at this point in time.
yeah, question to you, Deepak, because
I
you
love, I
mentioned.
love this question. I get this question a lot. And I've done this with my current startup as well as my previous one. I'll tell you there's a difference. With the current one, it was definitely easier as a second-time founder, but I'll probably talk about my Slintel journey, right? What we did. So first of all, those 50 people should not be friends and family, right? Ignore them. They have to be people in your ICP. You can have as narrow an ICP as possible. For example, in Slintel, right, we said, hey, VP of sales, director of sales, Series A to C funded companies, let's go after them first. That was one persona. Then we said RevOps was another persona. Then there was a third persona. So once you have identified your ICP, right, and let's say you get to 10,000 people, right, go as narrow as possible. 3, 4 different personas is fine. Now you have to start getting meetings with them. So the best, I emphasize this, right, the best time to get meetings is when you're not selling, when you're asking for feedback, right? And the best time to do that is when you're still building product before you start coding, or even when you're coding, right? All you have to do, and this worked really well for us, we reached out to VPs of sales in larger companies and we said, you have to massage their ego a little bit and you're asking for feedback. You're making it very clear, hey, we're not trying to sell you anything. We are two founders building something in a garage and we've been spending 2, 3 months on this. We are scratching our heads. I want 5 minutes of your time for feedback. And then obviously do some research, right? You publish this blog. I love this. People as human beings, we always want to give feedback, right? And so if you reach out to 100 people, I can guarantee you, like, you'll at least get like 15, 20 people to respond in a positive way when they sense that the moment they smell that you're selling something, you will not get a meeting at that stage, right? So make it very clear. And when you join the meeting, take feedback, ask questions, understand pain point, and do all of that. And a couple of months later, go back to them and tell them, hey, I've iterated on your feedback. We have built something. Again, need your feedback. Again, it's a funnel, right? So 1 out of 3 people will say yes, they'll take the meeting, iterate that again, and then do that after 2 more months. And then when you finally have the product ready, you go back to the people and say, hey, this is the MVP we've built based on your feedback, right? And when people have spent so much time with you, 2, 3 calls, you'd be surprised. They would themselves ask, hey, how much does it cost? Or if they are not buying, they'll say, how can I help you? Can I refer you to someone? And if not, if they don't ask, you go for the kill, right? Ask at that time and say, hey, like if this is useful based on your feedback, how much would you pay for it? Is there any way we can make this work? It's a give and take at this point, right? Before doing that, you also, you like their posts, give them something back, invite them to your podcast, you give them something that they need, ask for the sale. Don't peg on price too much at that point, right? But just get your first 5, 10 customers and go from there. That's what worked really well for us at Slintel.
Yeah, so we actually did the exact opposite. So we went ahead and we actually tried to sell as if we had a product, and surprisingly, I mean, people came on, and we got our first customers when we didn't have a product, but we had a concept that we kind of showed them, and that's how we started building the product. So my experience was exactly the opposite. The only difference is that we didn't go empty hand. We just did a video or prototype of what it would look for them through that outbound, and actually pitched as if like it is a real product out there. I don't know whether I'll do the same thing if I were starting new, but this is what happened, and it worked for us. So.
Quick follow-up question, Raghu, it might help the audience too. So when you went with that approach, because you didn't have a product, right? I'm assuming it was a Figma prototype or a video.
Yeah.
So would you tell people that, hey, like, we'll onboard you once the product is ready? So like, would you delay the onboarding but get the sale done? Or would they be okay with like waiting for a bit?
Yeah, okay. So what worked was I think the segment, because at that time, when people were seeing the demo of an automated chatbot in 2016, it was people were fascinated a little bit, for sure. And it did, even if the product wasn't fully built in terms of there's a builder and stuff, you could get the customer going with a barely built product as well. So we would go to the customers and tell that, oh, this is something that we can enable for you. Product or service, that's a different ball game when they're building. But yes, and you get in, and then you kind of start. And one of the things that we used to talk about is that, especially in our domain, is you can't write a swimming training manual without swimming yourself. In the sense that unless you have built out a chat agent, chatbot, or AI agent, whatever you call it, you don't know what it takes to kind of productize that and build it for multiple customers. So we were going and selling the concept of automating service with the chatbots at the start, right? I think that was the core pitch for companies that we approached.
Raghu, Deepak, one question is from the audience, and this is something that we have been also seeing while we meet early stage founders. I mean, people have complained a lot that, the outbound channels which they used to have, let's say, for example, an email and all, the drop-offs have significantly increased. There are possibly 100 plus AI SDRs which are out there. So people are also getting a lot of spams. So today, can you give some sense on how is outbound? I mean, what channels are people using, especially in early stage for their outbound motion? What channels do they focus on or should they focus on?
Actually, can I just add to the same question, which is that, if you look at the last 6 months, I think we have evaluated at least 10 AI SDR companies, and I'm assuming that there are 500 already. We can take a leap of faith that most email content will be generated by machine and not by humans tomorrow, right? Which means that we will have an explosion. Human attention is actually no different still, right? So is there something which needs to now fundamentally change in the approach for outbound, which was not true earlier?
Yeah. So for us, I think nothing else worked other than real cold calls and LinkedIn. Like email, I don't know if it worked for any people. In general, I mean, Deepak could have more inputs, but email did not work for us even when it was not super crowded. It was pure calls per se, and maybe LinkedIn messages once you connect and share content, etc.
Yeah, for us, and my experience dates back a few years, right? That's when I was selling Slintel. Post acquisition, I was in product, and now we have not started, a full blown sales motion yet. We're still building product. But back in the day, like 3 years ago, like email, everything worked. There were not as many AI SDRs, right? But what really worked at that time is you had to kind of have like a multi-step campaign, right? 3 emails, 2 LinkedIn outreaches, 3 cold calls, all interlaced, and you can use tools for that, right? Over a period of 40 days or 30 days, you have a multi-pronged approach. That worked okay. But what I've also heard, Alok and Raghu, and I've been in touch with a lot of founders who are building in the last couple of years, right? I've seen some of their 0 to whatever few million ARR journeys. They have said the same thing. They have said outbound, overall rates have dipped a little bit. And what they have done differently is like, they have focused a lot on, one founder focused a lot on small events, right? Like small lunches, dinners, 10, 12 people dinners, lunches, and did 40 of them last year, right? There was one founder who did that. There's another founder who focused on building community very early on, especially in a space where there is not as much community built and people want to meet and talk about their problems. So I've seen more innovative approaches coming up in the last 2, 3 years. I think outbound will generally work if you have a brand and if people know you and you have created the awareness, marketing has created the awareness. But if you're, without like enough credibility, I don't know, right? I think in some cases it might, like calling and Raghu, like calling and LinkedIn outreach. But you'll have to kind of do like a multiple motions together to get outbound to work.
Oh,
Actually,
100%.
Deepak, I want to double click on that last statement, in fact, which is that I'm making the assumption outbound is not just as simple as having a list and sending a message, right? You talked about the fact that you may have to do multiple emails, you may have to do LinkedIn, you might have to do some other channels. When you are conceptualizing these campaigns, these are multi-touch, and I'm also making the assumption these might be actually to multiple people within a company, right? Which sounds like a complex journey, frankly, and not a single event or a single campaign. My question is not very well formulated, but how do you begin to execute such complexity when you're so young? I mean, most people here, if they are starting with 2 people, 3 people, and maybe they have two other, I mean, how do you even create? Is it through tools? What do you do?
Yeah, I'd say you should have two types of tools definitely to ease out your journey, right? You can't do everything from scratch. So get a sales intelligence tool, whatever that tool is. Get a sales engagement tool to help you launch some of these campaigns and tracking, and then a basic CRM would do to store all this information. That's all you need. It's up to you how, because what that will help you is in your ICP, you can find, let's say, 1,000 people, 10,000 people, whatever that number is, with emails, with phone numbers, LinkedIn handles, and you can use the emails, the engagement tool to at least start those campaigns. And as you start reaching out to them, figure out other, like, right, for enterprise sales, you have to multi-thread. So at least you will know all the people in that account who are in your target decision maker list, right? And you can strategize on who do you reach out to at what. Don't burn all the leads in an account in a given month, right? You kind of space it out. But I would always want to supplement that, right? You want to, obviously, your marketing team has to do a good job, or you have to do a good job of your website, blog, content. Build wherever you can build credibility in the early stages, you have to build credibility. Attend events, put posts on LinkedIn, show up. Like if your decision makers are in US, go take photos with them, do whatever it takes, right? To show that you are credible, and there are other people who want to talk to you, and who are on your podcast, who are on your webinar. So I would say, like, in the early stages, you should not be shy. You should just go do everything out there as a founder. Even if you're an engineering founder, just go try everything out there. There's no shame, right? And once you start getting your first 20, 30 clients, I think it becomes relatively easier for that.
Yeah, and also I think to answer your question on complexity, I think we should make it as complex as our goal, right? Like, let's say if you're starting from zero, you want to get the first customer, then you don't want to boil the ocean. And is the founder reaching out to 100 people, testing it out, and that just solves it. You don't need to build a brand and stuff like that. But if your goal is, I want to add $1 million per quarter, and there's a clear product market fit, and you know the type of ICP, then it's a different ballgame. You use a multi-pronged approach of partners, top of the brand building, and then you kind of run a complex campaign. But you don't need to do that complex campaign if you're wanting to add, maybe 5 customers per quarter or 10 customers per quarter. So I think I've seen a lot of companies actually go too complex for a very a basic simple need, and you kind of build in layers as you kind of have higher goals to achieve, is my recommendation there.
By the way, Raghu and Deepak, I should tell you that this has turned out to be a more popular topic than I had imagined. The number of questions can probably take a few hours, if at all but we will try and be selective. I do want to do justice to a question that actually Shri had asked, which was in 2 parts. We answered one part, did not get a chance to answer the second part. And if either of you can opine on it, which is that even in your outbound, let's assume that the ACVs are such, to Deepak's earlier point, that outbound makes sense economically. But even there, you have different strata of customers. You can have a 100 million company, or a $500 million company, or a $10 billion company that you're targeting. So there again, there's a mid-market to an enterprise kind of a spectrum. What changes in your outbound strategy as the size of the prospective customer increases?
Yeah, I would say because this is another angle to it. One is, you could have a low ACV product. In other words, selling to a large enterprise customer. You could have a high ACV product selling to an enterprise customer. But I think the point to underline is enterprise customer, right? Because they all buy products the same way. And which is why, like, when you're selling to very large customers, your ACV better be high, right? And the reason for that is their buying cycles are long typically, right? And multiple people make a decision. I think there's been reports that in large companies, there's at least 20 people who make a buying decision together, right? And when you have such a big committee, it takes time. Legal takes time, procurement takes time, everything takes time. So you're going to spend 6 months to 9 months, who knows, right? Depending on the size of the company, at least on that sale. So don't do a 10K sale. Don't do it. Like, the price point should make sense, especially because the buying cycles are so long, and they have the budget, they have the money. So I would tie like large enterprise customer to also enterprise sale alone, like increase the price point, align both, and multi-thread, and figure out like how to kind of break it.
Yeah. I think what we have seen differs from, I would say, 100 million to 1 billion as a mid-market and 1 billion plus as an enterprise, is you have a named account strategy versus a broad territory strategy. When you're selling 75K, 100K ACVs, you could have, hey, these 10,000 accounts. Probably one or two decision makers will just run through all these decision makers whenever there is an interest to kind of go in. And for enterprise, Deepak comes from Sixth Sense, so you probably have an ABM. So you do outbound to certain candidates, but also you run your ads. You get a partner, you get a dinner meeting around that area. So you kind of attack the account from multiple different directions rather than just doing unilateral outbound to the same ICP across these companies. I think that's how I would look at a differentiating strategy around larger named accounts versus a broad-based territory kind of approach for outbound.
A question to you, Raghu. As the company goes from let's say, a 500,000 or a 1 million ARR to, let's say, a 5 million ARR, and you have to actually structure your outbound sales motion, you have to create a team. What could be some of the frameworks to actually compose this team? What could be the possible composition of this team, especially if they're targeting enterprises, let's say 100K plus?
And actually, can I layer another question, and which I know actually comes up with every company that we have been part of. Many people think it's so hard. Let me hire an external agency, and there are plenty of agencies which pitch. So to Shantan's question, would you build your own team, and then of course what skills to look for, or would you actually give it to someone else who does it for a lot of different companies?
So we have done both, Alok, and I think both of them worked in certain different times for sure. But having a in-house team always is a big advantage because you can experiment, iterate much faster. And the kind of people that you want to hire as leaders, and we succeeded in some cases, we didn't succeed in some cases, but a profile would be highly ambitious and highly analytical and data oriented, and super good in copy, especially ability to write or create copies that are strong for all the customers. External agencies, and the advantage is that you can have multiple of them compete against each other, and you can use the market dynamics to see if you can get something. And most of them are reasonably outcome based, and you can try it out. So the good part of having multiple agencies is you can use the competitive dynamics and try out different industries, try out different personas. And as you can, narrow down what's working, what's not working, and also amplify that. So I'm not saying that never works. It's about how are you picking, choosing, and use it in the right way.
Deepak, any different thought on this?
Yeah, I actually haven't had the experience of trying out multiple agencies, which Raghu has had. I've always been like tried internal person, right? It's just like you said, it's easier to iterate, it's easier to kind of stay in control. And probably we never reached the scale, Yellow.ai has. So we didn't try go that.
Got it. Deepak, I mean, given that you were at Sixth Sense and actually you built a sales intelligence company yourself at Slintel prior to that, one of the things at least we learned from you during that process is the notion of intent in the outbound motion, right? Which at least I remember at one point in time didn't exist. But as we know that the world has actually moved pretty fast on that front. What advice would you have for people who are starting out or early in their journey on how to use intent-based tools in their outbound? How important are they at the early stage itself to try out?
Yeah, great question. So let me start by the definition of what intent is and why it becomes important in the sales space. So today's buyers, a lot of buyers are anonymous, right? They don't necessarily talk to a salesperson until they have finished their research on G2. They have gone and visited 100 different websites. So by the time the salesperson is already talking to them, it's probably a little too late if you're starting off at that point in time, right? So intent helps you. It's a cat and mouse game, right? Intents help you stay a little bit ahead of the buyer. When the buyer is searching online, reading articles, intent basically tells you what keywords they're reading. They map it to the IP of the company and then predict with like this company is probably interested in this technology or this keyword, right? So you can go and talk to the buyer way before they finish their research, right? So that is intent. And Alok, we coined a term called pre-intent also in 6sense, which is even before buyers start searching, even before buyers know they have a need, right? You can, if you know when their contract renewals are coming up, like let's say 6 months down the lane, they will search for something 4 months later, right? Like 2 months before the renewal comes up. So technographics and some other signals, psychographics we used to call it, also give you some pre-intent information. So is this information helpful? I think definitely I've seen that work even in 6sense with a lot of companies who use that. When is the right time to get it and who should get it? I think in the beginning, you probably like for the first 20, 30 customers, keep it very simple. Like what Raghu said, all you need to know is your ICP companies, people, get your first 20, 30, whatever, or even maybe first 100, closures. Once you start scaling a little bit, right? And once you know what is working, I think intent really helps you launch different kinds of campaigns. So you could do an ABM campaign, right? So based on intent, like in 6sense, I'll give you a quick example. They used to have 4 categories of buyers. Buyers in the awareness stage, consideration, buyers in decision and purchase, right? Now, this is dependent on how much intensity of intent signals they're seeing, right? If they're visiting your website a lot, and if they are reading about that thing a lot, they're visiting G2, reading competitor pages, and they have done a lot of things already, then they're at the purchase stage, right? Otherwise, so then you can do like, you can run different plays depending on based on the intent, whether you want to do a marketing campaign or you want to meet them in person, what do you want to do? But I would say, yeah, that could come in a little bit later. I've seen companies that do it very early too, but at least initially it shouldn't matter in my
Understand.
opinion.
Yeah, we started very late on the intent journey and still not succeed. I mean, we are a 6sense customer, but it's not easy. It's not like you have an intent and it's at least. I mean, I might learn from Deepak to effectively use it. But I think it probably works for more established categories per se, and also you need to figure out who is the right person to kind of figure out in these companies to reach out. So I don't know if in early stages that's so important.
And I'd say, Raghu, yeah, you're right. Like intent as a signal by itself, if you just hinge on that and say, oh, this is high intent, I'll go reach out to this person, get a meeting, it doesn't generally work that way. I think you have to club intent with all the other signals. What used to work is if you look at, because a lot of this is, there's some guesswork, there is some predictions. You don't know with 100% certainty that there is this intent, right? So what used to work is, hey, they are showing intent in these keywords, which matter to me. There's a contract renewal coming up in 3-4 months, which is a good sign. And then these people are visiting my website. So you club 4 or 5 different signals and then narrow down. I think you get to a certain higher degree of confidence and then you run your place. But end of the day, it's still guesswork. I mean, you can go from a 50% probability to maybe 60, 70% probability, but it's not getting you to 100%. Yeah.
Got it.
Deepak, one point that you mentioned was, and also to you, Raghu, as well. I mean, a lot of people have started creating a community, and you also need referenceability from your current customers. So at least once you've started landing your first set of enterprise customers, how do you make a good scalable referral channel? How do you incentivize your own customers to actually make those referrals? How do you make that channel work?
I can go first. I don't have much to contribute here, but I would say like what we used to do is we used to have. I mean, obviously you can't. Customers have to voluntarily refer, right? So we used to have customers who absolutely love our product, the green customers and ones that absolutely love, and we used to have a short list of them, and we used to keep rotating that short list, right? And we would have very deep personal relationships with them. If we so reference is definitely easier than referral, right? If you already have someone in the buying cycles and you just want a quick reference, they will say yes. But if you want them to refer, there has to be, I would say, the ones that I've seen work are where you have something in the product inbuilt, right? Like especially for lower ACV deals, it works where you're giving some free credits or free dollar value thing, some benefit to the company. Some motion like that works. But for me, like I've seen the most of the time, it's if they see an amazing product, they will refer. And if they don't want to refer, that means they probably are not seeing an amazing product. It's not because of the monetary incentive or something that you are giving. Uh, yeah, I, reference is easier though.
Something interesting there, and we call viral enterprise markets and organic enterprise markets. Since we sold in India, Asia Pacific, Middle East as well, along with the US. Somehow, especially regions where WhatsApp is quite popular, these companies have these WhatsApp groups of CX heads or IT heads and all that stuff. Especially, we saw viral growth in India, SCA, Middle East markets, where all these CIOs and all these guys have this WhatsApp groups, and they used to interact. Oh, which is the company that you are working with? What's the feedback? And we saw a real explosion, especially during COVID, because most of the companies were looking for a product around that. Whereas that's a little difficult in the US. There are not so many, closely knit groups where you're on a WhatsApp group on an informal basis, etc. But even here, we have seen referrals where we have asked customers to talk in forums. Let's say for us, contact center week, we bring in one of our successful customer. They talk about your product pretty strongly. That opens up a chain. They meet their friends there, so they ask about the company. So you need to kind of create those moments where they can share. In some markets, it happens naturally as well, where there's more informal network of executives.
Correct. Deepak and Raghu, I want to chime in actually with a question from my side, which is that we did talk about the AI SDR and the clutters it may create. But now forget the clutter that it creates. If you are starting a company today, would you, as you are setting up your outbound channel, would you advise people that look, they should actually buy into an AI SDR right in the beginning as well? Because why do something, why reinvent the wheel if somebody else has already figured it out and you can actually create that motion via software? Why bother about even hiring? Just actually go with that. When would you not actually go with that approach?
Yeah. So my thesis here, Alok, is not just with sales, right? With marketing, engineering. I don't think you need as many people as you needed before, right? You definitely need supervisory roles. You definitely need some folks to do the job, but AI has made it so much easier to do jobs at scale, right? So you probably don't need to overhire. I would not get my first SDR as an AI SDR. The first 2, 3, 4, 5 might be SDRs themselves. And then if they want to supplement their efforts with an AI SDR, I would be definitely open to trying. So AI SDRs, what I've seen is, there's, like you said, there's a lot of tools. I don't think anybody has made outbound AI SDR work yet, right? That's the feedback I've got from a lot of companies. Inbound cases, AI SDR still works okay, right? Because, there is interest, there's a template. Outbound, it's still more art right now, and AI SDRs have, but I do believe though that in a year or two, things could change drastically as AI gets more sophisticated. There could be more place you could run with the AI SDR. So I would experiment. I would do both.
Yeah, I think we have seen that as an amplifying agent for sure, but not a replacing agent as well. But we are experimenting with our own tech, and we have an opportunity to do that even for outbound because we are talking about how great voice agents are. So we could use that as a message for them to experience a voice agent while doing an outbound call. We haven't yet done it; it's under progress, so I'll keep you all posted. But right now, we are seeing that as an amplification agent rather than replacing. That's why they are called AI SDRs. SDR is typically a common term used for inbound. BDR is a common term used for outbound. So there's not a lot of explosion of AI BDR set. There's a lot of explosion of AI SDRs, and I haven't seen a lot of outbound calls going from voice agents yet for B2B from what I've seen yet.
Got it. Got it.
Uh,
Shant, pick or
lots
should I
of
pick?
Why don't you pick, Alok? There are
Okay,
lots.
I will. I'll then pick up part of a question from Venkat Naidu. He has actually two questions. I'll pick the first one first here, which is that you have multiple outbound, you have multiple demand gen motions. You have inbound, you have outbound. Even in outbound, as we discussed, it's a journey. When you are particularly targeting mid-market or enterprise, it's not a single touch. And Deepak, you mentioned you may do multiple emails, LinkedIn campaigns, this campaign, that campaign, whatever, webinars, lots of different things might happen. Now, in the end, as a founder or as a marketeer, both, you have a certain budget, you are running these campaigns, they cost you money. And in these complex journeys, even if something becomes an opportunity and let's say eventually a customer and you are calculating your CAC, etc., how do you justify the ROIs of individual campaigns that you ran? How do you attribute? Because now that it's a complex journey, what contributed to this entity becoming a customer is very confusing, right? How do you justify? And frankly, even as a founder, as you are reviewing the work of your marketing team, how do you actually help them justify or not justify these expenses?
This is $1 trillion question, Alok. Marketing attribution, it's a mess, right? It's very hard because there's so many different touch points from marketers and salespeople. It's hard to pinpoint and say this is the reason why this became an opportunity or this closed, right? Because sales will take the credit, marketing will want to take the credit. But I think what we can measure is the total cost of acquisition, right?
Right.
And then you can also see what are the out of 10 channels that you are running, what are the 3-4 channels that worked for this particular lead, right?
Right.
So by doing all of those analysis, you can come up with total cost for each channel, rough estimates, and then total ROI of each channel to have brought. I mean, although you may not nitty-gritty is can you attribute it 100% to this channel? Definitely not. So you'll have to make some assumptions, and then see what is working, right? So there's there's some channels in the early stages you want to stay away from. Like SEM, for example, unless you have raised funding, you have start with the low cost channels. Low cost, high ROI is best until you get to a certain scale or raise some funding.
Got it.
So my view on that is, I think every channel should have a direct contribution and a potential influence contribution to be measured. And as long as direct contribution is not significant, you might not turn off the channel, but I mean, you should not scale it unless there is a clear direct attribution. That's the philosophy that we have broadly taken.
Understood. So actually, maybe if I can peel the onion on the channel question, and Venkat's second part was this, that if you look at the different channels available, there is email, there is LinkedIn, there is calling, and actually, I think Jaideep also put a question around WhatsApp as a potential channel. Between and there are webinars, by the way, there are events. We didn't even get to events today. But any hypothesis on which channels work best?
And at what stage of the business as well?
Yeah, I would say I just boil it down again back to enterprise sale, mid-market or SMB, right? And there are some channels, proven channels, like if you look at history as well. So enterprise buyers, they are not going to come to your website and get go, right? They have other things to do. So you have to go meet them, right? So with enterprise sales, events becomes very important. Figuring out how to invite them to your podcast becomes very important. Going and opening up, like having your booth at Dreamforce or whatever event, right? Where your target personas are, you have to hang out where they are hanging out. And then you have to build credibility by brand, which means You have to spend money and time with Gartner, Forrester. You have to rank on those waves. You have to come across as a leader, right? So in enterprise sale, right? I would say mid-market is somewhere in the middle where outbound sales, LinkedIn, calling, email will work. For enterprise also, it will work, but you'll have to have some credibility. Here, you can do things at a little more, at a mass scale. But I would still do the other stuff. And then if it's like low ACV, you don't have that much luxury. So either you have PLG, right? The product itself is selling, and you have a free, or it's marketing doing all the selling, if not product, right? So there's a ton of SEO, SEM, ton of awareness. People come sign up, and then and then your sales team does a quick demo and close those deals.
Actually, can I chime in with one last question? And I know we're going to hit the time buzzer here. This is from Roshank from Portkey, because this is also a question that comes up in many companies. So let's say you have to hire a BDR. Would you hire in India? Would you hire in US? And opinions on this vary a lot, but I'm curious for both of you as entrepreneurs. I'm sure you have experimented. What has worked? What has not worked?
For us, only US has worked. Look,
Wow.
only look at US now.
Oh,
Yeah.
Thank-
We had the opposite experience. We had BDRs in India that worked. But I mean, if I were to do it again, I would hire enterprise BDRs in US, SMB, mid-market. If you do both motions, mid-market and enterprise, mid-market in India, enterprise in US. That's what I would do.
And would you do that even at an early stage? I mean, imagine a company that has raised just 2 or 3 million as a seed check. Would you do that? Would you hire that BDR in the US then?
I would
I
go
wouldn't.
with Deepak, right? Whether it's enterprise or SMB or mid-market. I found it very tough to get enterprise buyers with India-based. Some companies have done that. High Radius, historically, I think they have succeeded really well in that. But I don't have a lot of examples in general around companies that have succeeded at 100K plus, 200K plus enterprise motion from India in new categories. Maybe in existing categories, it's potentially a little simpler. We tried a lot. Maybe we didn't have the right people. Somehow we were not able to get India to US enterprise motion really working in terms of outbound.
Great. With that, we have hit the time buzzer. As we always say, we'll start on time, we'll end on time, and it is 10:30. Thank you, Deepak. Thank you, Raghu. This was super, super useful. I can at least confess for myself, I actually learned a lot in the session from both of you today. And thank you to all the guests who also joined and asked their questions. And apologies to all the people for whose questions we were not able to answer today, but hopefully it was useful for everyone. So thank you so much.